Hello and welcome, my fellow AGD coders. I hope you've had a great holiday, and I apologize for not having done any videos for a little while. I've been quite busy, as you can imagine, with Christmas, spending some time with the family and all that. And I've also been working on a couple of AGD games which are getting close to completion. Haven't announced them yet. Some of you will be aware of them, but I've been keeping them for a surprise for the new year, so look out for those when they come out. Okay, so I thought I'd just do a quick video for you today, just to kind of keep some continuity. So I'm going to show you just a very simple trick, really, and that's how to create some basic messages like this using objects. And objects are quite an underused part of AGD, and they can be quite flexible when you want to do something fairly simple with a minimal amount of memory. So as you can see here, looking at the sprites, I literally have no sprite involved here other than a blank sprite. So what we'll do instead is we'll have a look at the objects. And the reason that we're using objects is because an object uses up around about 38 bytes as compared to a single sprite frame, which holds about 128. So it's roughly a third, even slightly less than that. So as you can see here, I've created a total of 7 objects with text on them like this, using small text like this. Now obviously I could do this with messages, but and it would take up less memory, but it wouldn't be as flexible. It wouldn't be able to move around the screen as smoothly, and when it encounters another moving object, it won't cause any screen corruption, which is obviously quite important. Okay, so we'll start by putting a sprite type 8. As you can see up here, I have got sprite type 8. You can use whichever type you want, and you basically choose where the sprite starts, and that will be where your message starts from left to right. Okay, so now let's look at the event code where we will control the sprite, and I'll show you how we then also connect the objects in a line to basically follow the sprite wherever it goes. So we'll go now into the event code, and we'll go to sprite type 8, and the first thing we can see here, of course, is temporary variables opt and obj. I tend to use opt, obj and rand these days to function as temporary variables, because they are basically temporary and are not used as globals, and so that's why they're usually the most useful. Now as you can see, I've got a loop here which is repeating 7 times, so it's going to step through and do the same thing for each of the objects. The first thing that it does is create a random color. You're probably familiar with this kind of code. As you can see here, Sprint is Sprite Inc. I'm using the reduced set of commands, and yeah, so that's basically the color part. You should be familiar with that already. It just chooses a random color between 1 and 6 and puts it into the sprite. So the next thing that we'll do is, as you can see here, get object and put object. So object starts at 0, and it will of course repeat 7 times, and you can see a bit further down, add 1 to object. So we're going to run from object 0 to object 6 if we use get and then put. So this will basically take the object and put it in the position of the sprite. So then what we need to do is add 16 to opt and 16 to y. 16 to y should be fairly obvious. We're moving the sprite across 16 pixels. 16 to opt, on the other hand, is a way of measuring how many pixels we have moved within the loop. Now the reason that's important is because obviously not every message is going to be exactly 7 objects. It could be 4, 5, however many that you want, and this will basically count, as you see here, repeat 7, but it will count every time you move across to the right, and therefore when we get to the end of the command here, we sub opt to y, and that basically means that you're going to restore y back to its original position. at the beginning. It's very important when you're working with objects to make sure that you have a kind of enclosed bit of code there, which means that the X and Y coordinates are back to what they were at the start of the routine, because obviously then your sprite, which is of course linked to the objects, will be back where it should be, and it won't move in a random or strange, unpredictable way. Now everything below that code is basically just standard sprite code. You can use your sprite and move it around, and the objects are now all linked to the sprite and will move with it. So as you can see here, I'm using PMA and PMB to control the direction, which can be 254, which is -2, or +2. I've also set a limit here, as you can see, 150 for X and 120 for Y, and the reason that I'm using 120 is obviously we've got a long series of objects, so 7 objects times 16 pixels, it's something like 100 or so pixels, so obviously I don't want to go over the limit of the screen and have it overlap. Okay, now here in the sprite initialization code we set PMB and PMA to tell the code which direction we want to start off with. So if I use +2 and +2, obviously it will start by moving to the right and down. So let's take a look at that. And you can see it starts by moving down. You can change the start position as well, which I'll show you in a minute. But if I was to change this to 254, we'll see that it now starts by moving up and to the right. And if I was to change it again, this time I'll change this one. And obviously if you want to, you could change these values to make the message move more slowly or more quickly. You can also choose where you want to start from by just putting the sprite from a start position like that. Potentially you could even spawn the sprite like this, and that would also work. Just be careful, of course, with objects that you don't print them off the side of the screen. It's not a problem for the Y coordinate, but if you print an object above a value of 192, then it will cause a corruption in AGD that will actually basically crash and reset the spectrum. So let's take a look at one way that this can be avoided. For example, you might want a message that is actually controlled by another sprite that's bouncing around or patrolling or something like this, and obviously you need to make sure that the sprite doesn't go over the limit and print off the screen, because although sprites actually will be fine off screen, it won't work with objects. You have to make sure that they don't print off screen. So initially we'll just put a check in here to make sure that X doesn't go above 192. Well, actually, in fact, I think what we need to do is, because the object is 16 pixels high, we'll have to go back and change this 192 to 176. Okay, so that will make sure that whatever happens, the object will never be put off the screen, and so therefore it won't crash. Quite useful to put these things in there if you're experimenting. Obviously, saving the code is always a good idea as well. Okay, so I mean, this code here actually isn't necessary for this particular effect, because as you can see here, I've got if X greater than 150, so we've already kind of covered that. But nevertheless, as long as we make sure that X is less than that number, it will allow us to have a play about and experiment, perhaps even linking the code to a player controlled type object as well. Okay, so there you can see it in action one more time. A couple of other things that perhaps we might like to think about, just to show you some of the possibilities. The reason that objects are quite useful, of course, is, as I said, when you have other objects such as sprites moving around, they won't interfere with them at all. And I can also show you here that they, unlike messages, they won't overwrite the blocks either. So messages will simply just write over anything, which can be useful, but not as flexible here. So what I'll do then, just to show you again, and you can just play about with this as well, is that I'll put some blocks on here, and we'll just create a very simple pattern. And really I'm just going to show you here that the pixels won't be affected at all, and there you go. Now as you can see here, although the pixels aren't affected as promised, it's certainly not the case for the attributes. And so if you do want to make messages like this, then if you're going to use color, then really you need to have it in a special area that the color is not going to be affected, because it's pretty difficult to control that amount of color as you're moving around. So we'll certainly give it a go though. I'll show you now what happens if we try to set the Sprite Inc to change it here. So if I put in another Sprite Inc here, so once the object has been printed, I'll tell it to reset the Sprite Inc here, and as you can see, well, it doesn't really work. You can get a little bit of a flash of color, but yeah, there is a little bit of a limitation there. So flashing colors for your messages when you've got a level or something behind them, probably not really going to work. So we'll take the code out and we'll run it one more time. And there. So basically, if you had color now, if your level behind this message was in color, it wouldn't be a problem, because objects don't have attributes. It wouldn't be printing any color. It's just that the color routine that I coded in there is the thing that's actually affecting the screen. So we just take that out. Okay, well, that's another episode in the bag. I hope you found it useful. If you're watching this video around the time that I'm recording it, then I wish you a very happy 2018. Good luck, and I'll be back soon with another AGD video. In the meantime, happy coding. Bye bye.